Look at that! There's those little piggies. Of course, pigs living by the woods have to be careful. Ooh. You know, their silly song always makes me laugh. But they should be looking out for the big bad wolf. For the big bad, for the big bad, for the big bad, for the big bad wolf.
Hello, this is the connoisseur of werewolf fur, of things with fangs that go grrr. You might do that if you like to. Anyway, if you would be kind enough to like us and subscribe to us on YouTube if you've been there, there's links in the description-y thing. You can also follow us on loads of different platforms. They're there. There's loads of lunatics on the Facebook group and Instagram and X and all those wonderful things. You could review us, and that'd be really nice. Other than that, really enjoy the series that we're doing because it's dead good. Well, we would say that, wouldn't we? But, you know, have fun. And remember, as always, us at Werewolf the Podcast, the serial killer drama. Love you. Bye. Well, the fairy Foxglove floats and gloats before me. She says nothing. She just flutters and bites her bottom lip, looking at me with glee on that very pretty green face. I mean, she's very good looking, but I don't really know whether that is a glamour or not. You know what I mean by a glamour, don't you? It's like the tricky, shitty sort of magic that the supernatural con creatures do. In the least harmful cases, it sort of makes them invisible or hidden. In the worst cases, they can make you think you're back with a lost loved one. They can seduce you to murder, convince you to raid the cookie jar when on a diet. I mean, a glamour can be used to, like, hide a cliff that you could be made to walk off. They could get you to pay their lunch bill. All that cool shit. I have to learn to be glamorous. It would be so cool, making daft twats walk off cliffs. I don't think, is glamorous the right way? I'd say, I don't know, is that a correct term for that? I like the cliffs idea, that would be fun, eh? Making the edge seem 1 foot further back than it really is. Until now, I just, chuck people off cliffs for laughs. It was annoying sometimes, you have to catch them first. It would be fun to have them do it themselves like lemmings, wouldn't it? Watch their little falling bodies. Oh, help me! I am falling to my death! Before the satisfying splat. Joyful. Nah, well, she's pretty alright, says Fen, my werewolf soul, bringing my thoughts back to the little gloating bitch hovering in the air before me on shimmering wings. I notice she's not entered the protective bubble surrounding me and Fen in the sea. It's a thing that's just slightly there, the protection-y, magically shieldy thing. I know slightly there. I know, what does that mean, slightly there? But what I mean is that the bubble seems there and yet not. Yep, weird in a weird way. It's magic and stuff, so weird should be part of the experience.
And you gonna fight against your restraints in a manly, alpha, wolfy sort of way? Aren't you gonna rail against your chains like Fenrir himself? Aren't you gonna become the big wolf man and rip away from the chair and through this thin, magical, protective miasma and kill everyone and everything and then grab me and then
The fairy was off on some sort of thought train that was, well, it seemed very personal and it seemed very exciting. For her, she shook with a lot of excitement. It was quite shocking and intense to behold, and the next few sentences made very little sense as she just garbled words. Her body language that accompanied the whole thing was a lot, with certain actions that would have to take this episode to an R-rated listing if it was a video. I mean, I know that some of you would have liked to have seen that. Yet, I've saved some of you who did not want to see it from seeing it, so 50-50 there. Eventually, she calmed down. Even the creatures that stood with her, you could see, felt uncomfortable. There was definitely an awkward tint to the air. I am a werewolf, so my senses see things in a slightly different way than you poor monkey ones. This air had an awkward tint. It's kind of, I don't know, aubergine. Yeah, awkward coloured aubergine. She was still flittering, flying in the air, but looking slightly exhausted, and was leaning against the arm of the giant pile of shit that was, well, it was the giant made out of a pile of shit. She was using a small fan retrieved from somewhere in her clothing. Where she took that fan from, looking at her? That tiny outfit? I could only guess. It definitely didn't have any pockets. Fen sniggered at the mental imagery running through my brain. I sniggered too. When we get together, we can act like real teenagers. It was ace.
Oh my. Oh, that was a very exciting moment.
She said, her green cheeks turning red with a little embarrassment and increased blood flow, and the fan was almost invisible at the speed of its use. I bet it was, the giant wolf said with another unwolfy snigger, which she ignored.
Yeah, anyway, I need to focus.
She said out loud to all.
You are so hot!
She told me, engaging in that very deranged manner. She was just staring at my left ear.
Anyway, right, I need to get my knickers out of a twist and be professional, Foxglove.
She rummaged her left hand around her backside. I can only imagine what she was straightening with her tiny fingers, and while she rummaged, she continued to talk to herself out loud as though no one else could hear what she was saying. It was a professorism.
Most disconcerting.
She's fucking nuts, said Fen. Now that was a Fenism. The creatures with Foxglove shrunk back at his words, and Foxglove went instantly silent and stared at the wolf soul. She had like a twitchy right eye and a look on her face somewhere between happiness and utter bloody batshit craziness. I looked at Fen, and he looked at me and shook his huge hairy head. Utterly fucking mental, that one, he told me. I smiled even more. I knew he was trying to make her angry, and I hoped he was doing a good job of it.
Who or what the fuck do you think you are in my life? You're a see-through, pointless ball of fur. You can't even touch the world. You can't even scratch your own itch. You're a loser, and you have no power without this one.
She was breathing hard and pointing at me. Her face changed briefly when she looked at me. It was a hungry face, and although not angry, did not make me feel any better than Fen felt at that moment. Actually, the face she made me probably feel worse than he could possibly feel. Yup, he said in my brain.
So, what are you gonna do, Fenrir? All you can do is talk.
She spat at the soul. Silence reigned for a moment before the children's chanting came back into the range of my hearing. My head had to adjust from listening to the fairy. As she'd shouted and yelled, she'd got closer and closer to the membrane of the magical shield type thing. I now got what Fen was up to. Come on, fairy Foxglove, get inside the fucking bubble of protection. It's a bubble of irritation for us, and we will see what little power Fenrir has once you get inside, Foxglove. The fairy's tip of her nose touched the bubble, and she stopped moving suddenly. A look of sly recognition slowly drew itself across her face. The anger left her, and she smiled as she raised her right hand and touched the coruscating membrane of magic before her.
Oh, you're good. See that, guys?
She turned to her horde of horrors, who nodded heads and cowls in a sycophantic way, and, well, bits that should have been heads, I assume.
You see that?
She pointed to us now as if to emphasise what she was saying.
You were trying to get me to...
Again, she looked at her crew and pointed to us.
You were trying to get me into that aura of protection.
She shook her head in disbelief.
See? See how we need him? They're good. They're real good.
This time, she said that to herself. Her focus then came back to us as she flew around the entire bubble of magic, laughing. We watched her. How could you not watch a mini force of madness like that? She was actually fucking mesmerizing. She paused in her journey and pushed a tiny toe gently through the magical force field and shivered with an audible
Oh. You were trying to get me to come inside there.
She laughed as she quickly withdrew the toe, turning to look at her cronies who were trying to figure out how to react and what the fuck was happening. The 4 fairies that had flitted at the front of the group all looked sort of confused. The other creatures, well, they just looked like they usually did, which was, well, they always look confused.
Did you see that, girls? He was trying to get me too.
She poked an arm through the membrane up to the elbow without really looking at us. She had all her attention on the fairies with her. Could we get it? Should we get it? I looked at Fen and he shook his head with a no.
Stick my bits in so that he could grab me.
She turned to the 4 flying women. They looked at each other and then Foxglove, and Fate laughs uncomfortably. Foxglove was not satisfied with this though. She gave the other creatures at the party a sort of unhinged look and they joined in with a laugh out of an innate sense of self-protection. It was time to wind up the weirdo. And at this thought, my wolf soul heartily nodded. Strangely, she couldn't hear my shared telepathic thoughts, but she could sort of clearly hear Fen's. That's weird, isn't it? When he spoke telepathically to me, she could hear it, but Anyway, I laughed, and Fen accompanied me with his own wolfy chuckle. Purposefully being annoying comes easily to me and my best friend. What were the possible consequences? Well, we didn't care. We just wanted to see if we could make the fairy snap. She snapped already, said Fen. Again, joint laughter from us. The fairy's focus now turned away from her gang back to me. She had a questioning look on her face as to why we were laughing. Yeah, we had her starting down the slope of what would be, hopefully, a fucking huge temper tantrum. It was easy to do because she was so easy to read. This was not even going to be a challenge to wind her up. In Britain, we love to wind people up. I call it bullying light. Normally, this kind of winding up would be aimed at those that had, great opinions of themselves. The fairy's face hardened and she slowly withdrew her arm from the magic boundary that surrounded us. Viciousness became her evident emotion.
What you laughing at, boys?
She said quite softly and sweetly. Fen and I looked at each other and back at the fairy and smirked and started laughing. You could see that she was not used to beings being like this with her.
What you laughing at, boys?
She said demurely, taking her focus to her well-painted nails. The other fairies were now flittering into cover behind the big lump of shit giant. The cowled figures made as much space as they could between us and them. Even Gupsy hid himself behind the giant's foot and peeked out from his sight of safety with a very evil grin. The giant, well, he just seemed to have no idea as to what was happening. His focus was elsewhere as he was picking his nose and he seemed to take out a really badly damaged microwave from a gooey nostril. Examined it with care and then placed it hungrily into his mouth. I could hear the crunching. It might just take one more stir of the pot to make a pop. Here it came. I looked at Fen and he looked at me. We nodded at one another and laughed again. The fairy exploded into anger. It was What would the professor say?
Utterly marvellous.
This takes me back to the time we managed to get Sergeant Johnson to stand on the anti-personnel mine back in Iraq, Fen said, laughing at the nostalgic memory. Well, except that his explosive reaction got him to jump about 14 feet in the air and tore his legs off. Oh, I do look back on that with a happy heart. The blood and the screams. Then the Foxglove mine in this case, went boop. She screamed a keening scream that the wolf's soul shook his head at. It was a horrendous sound. Well, that's bloody loud, Fen's mind sense mine. Makes me teeth buzz. The magical gang of creatures on the other side of the magical membrane flinched down and held their heads, trying to cover their ears. The rage was beautiful to watch. I have to say, it was so impressive. She must have been screaming for ages, for multiple seconds, and continued to do so as her rage and face turned to her compatriots. The fairies were blasted from the air onto the ground in a somewhat complicated pile. The stupid long scream of rage still continued as it passed over the rows of kids in front of me. It was as though she was producing a beam of extreme heat or something. Wherever the scream was directed, children died. Heads exploded and bodies melted in the chairs. Fires broke out and children were burnt and scalded. The few youngsters' faces we saw were filled with terror and pain. It was amazing to see. This little creature's power was beyond anything I could conceive. Such a little creature to have such power. It carried on. We watched more kids torn apart and wrenched from their seats so they were smashed about. 10 seconds of this type of thing's a long time, but it seemed to go on for a lot longer than that. It was her fucking awesome. Eventually the scream ran out of steam and the fairy fell from the air. I thought she was going to crash to the ground in a faint, but she landed gracefully on her feet. She was exhausted. Silence fell. The two cowl creatures accompanying Foxglove had already turned to putting out fires and stopping those survivors of the horrific attack from suffering further. Their magics were pretty impressive as they fought to bring a dose of normality back to this unnormal room. Slowly and somewhat disappointingly, the screams and moans of the dying stopped. They sounded so wonderful. The four fairies had picked themselves up from the floor and gave nervous giggles as they looked around at the destruction Foxglove had caused. Poor Gupsy was trying to put out the giant's foot. It had started to burn merrily, and Gupsy was gently wafting a cloth and the giant was stamping on his own foot. Again, it was amusing to watch the two of them. It was quite sweet. Foxglove was at her most frightening now. She was not posturing or talking, but just stood with her head bowed to the floor, and I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. She was obviously a little tired from the massive amount of energy she just released. I wonder how many she'd killed with just that simple scream. My ears were still ringing from it, and we were in this protective, magical stopping bubble thing. She now lifted her head, and my eyes met those fucking eyes.
The Professor. We were finally ready for action. I'd like to say that it was Vaughant's fault that she'd taken a long time to get prepared, but it was not the case. The time had been mine that was taken. We dealt with the two changing changelings that had come to take me hostage or prisoner or maybe guest. I mean, at the end of the day, who knew? They could have tried to kill me. They could have tried. The portal invoked by our dead attackers was still standing, so I decided to go back through it. As I had no clue what would be on the other side, I had to make sure that I had all I needed, for all eventualities. Most important of that kit was the Werecat herself. The Werecat was bored and distractedly playing fetch with Dave, our household pet Chupacabra. He was having fun. Bless him. I'd got everything I could think of. I was sure I did. I had a large pile in front of the magical gateway to wherever it was a gateway to. I was doing an audible audit type thing to see if I had all I needed so I could focus on what I was doing instead of being disturbed by the loud silence that Vaunt was employing to make me hurry up. Okay. I have all 42 apotropaic magic amulets, I said, as Vaunt yawned, as only a Werecat can. She had no need to be able to tell me that she was bored in sign language. She was obviously bored, but I knew that good planning for these things was tantamount to their success. Do I need the Hermanoganic amulet? No, probably not. That's been useless since that job in France with the beast of Gévaudan. I have my 6 wards of power. I kicked a black nylon SWAT bag. Hissing Krebelux worm. I kicked a canvas army kit bag, which hissed back at me in response. Yep, it's in the top of the bag. I have the 32 elixirs of Marshkempt. Yes, they'll be bloody useful if those changeling things have glamours. Now, for the powders. I knelt to my leather saddlebag. It's funny how I'd never transferred these things from this ancient leather sack since the 1400s. I stroked the bag with an index finger, soaking up the feelings of the past that it imbued in me. My mind came back to the present. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see that both Dave and Vaunt had given up playing ball and were sitting and looking at me with an element of disgust. Too many to name at this juncture. All I need, though, I hope. Belt of 10 glass vials of iron filings, 100 grams each. Belt of 10 vials of salt from the Dead Sea. Belt of 10 vials of sulphur blessed by the devil herself. Now, I turned to the pile of weapons that I'd brought. Arming sword, short sword, hammer, poignard, obviously, skinning blade, baldric belt, hip scabbard, thigh scabbard. Ooh, I loved the medieval mixture. I knew them so well I could quickly move on through. I have my 2 Browning high-power pistols, one blessed and burdened with silver bullets. I quickly ran through the checks on the beautifully maintained pistol. I smoothly ejected the magazine and then rapped the slide back and forth a few times before replacing the clip. I stowed it in the holster and placed it in the tote bag before doing the same with the dark iron pistol with the dark iron shells made from sky iron with a holster for the chest. I got to my feet again. I have the 2 Glocks. Standard. Shotgun, I think, as well. Has to be the Mossberg. Much easier to use with wet hands. Iron filing shells and hellfire shells. 30 of each. 35? No, fuck it. 50. Bandoliers for those. Shield? No, I probably won't need it. I mean, I want it, but it'll just get in the way. Okay. 2 litres of multi-faith blessed water, though. I mean, it's not the best, but it will do the job. Okay. I can't hear you there being all silent, Vaunt. I am hurrying, though, I told her. Got that bloody awful Kevlar body armour. I shook my head. So badly put together, you just don't get the armourers these days. I mean, even the tailors aren't much cop these days. Okay, Vaunt, could you please help me get into all this kit? It'd be awfully kind of you, I asked her, turning to the full-length hall mirror as I started to dress. In the reflection, I saw the young woman roll her eyes and then make her way towards me. 10 minutes later, well, maybe 20, I was ready with the aid of my housekeeper. I was armoured up and had everything in easy reach on my body. Luckily, I'd been a knight in prior centuries. I was used to full plate. This modern stuff would be easy to carry. I posed briefly in the mirror. I have to admit it, I looked like an absolute, what is it the American chaps say these days? A total bad arse. Yes, that's it. A total bad arse. Now, next to me stood Vaunt. She looked at me in the mirror with a hint of perplexed amusement. There was I, totally prepared for everything. Holsters, swords, knives, several bags of magical items, Kevlar armor, and finally the Mossberg shotter wrapped on my shoulder. Gosh, everything I needed, and a bloody badass to boot. There she was in her black body glove, wearing a unitard type thing and sporting a fresh haircut. And that was it. I mean, she was a living weapon, was she not? The suit she donned was no less technical than any of the kit I was wearing. It had been designed by the government boffins to be able to handle her transformation into the Werecat and back again. I'd have to get Will something like that one of these days. Why'd he never thought of that himself, actually? "Is that everything you need, old girl?" I asked her. She turned back and forth in front of the mirror. She was obviously checking herself over. Well, I have to admit it. So was I. She was a fine example of a homo felis sylvestris. And that body glove thing did, well, for all my good qualities, I'm only a man at the end of the day. I suddenly noticed she'd paused in her movements, and my eyes went from, where they rested, to her almond-coloured eyes. She signed to me in no uncertain terms to get your eyes up here. I coloured somewhat in response. I tried to start, but she just shook her head and preened the black mohawk that stood a foot high, checked her perfect Gothic style, I believe you call it, makeup, and bowed to present herself for my inspection with a big smile. I did my best as a gentleman and tried to recollect what a youth of her generation would like an old fuddy-duddy like me to respond with. What is it I should say? Radical? No. Awesome. Yes. No, not awesome. I settled on an oldie but goodie. "You look utterly dangerous, my dear," I told her. Her smile and the pointy cat teeth she exposed were a happy given reaction from her. I gave myself the final pat-down checks. "Oh, blast! I forgot the hairs of Catherine of Siena, damn it," I said. I was about to turn to the stairs when Vaunt once again stood in front of me with the little plastic envelope, holding the 2 incalculably valuable strands of that saintly woman's hair. I was now bomb-proof in warding off any paranormal attacks. I carefully slipped the tiny packet into the breast pocket of my body armor. A gentleman always has a breast pocket in his jacket. Where else would he put his handkerchief? I repeated the pat-down check, completing it happily. "Right, let's go," I said before realizing that Dave was still abroad in the hall. Could you, I managed to say, pointing towards the Chupacabra before it disappeared in a cloud of snot with a cut-off whine. Doors opened and closed, and a young woman stood in front of me with a face of excitement. She was bloody quick, I turned from the mirror to go to the portal and fell flat onto my face like a giant sequoia tree with a crash of heavy items reverberating through the echoey hall. Bugger. I tried to press up in a manly manner, but sadly I could not. I tried to roll onto my back and sit up, but was held pretty firmly by items which prevented me from doing so. Oh, sod it. Finally, I managed to get my elbows under me so that I could lift my head. I didn't want to. It was the last thing I wanted to do. But I looked at Vaunt, and she was laughing and holding her stomach in complete silence. All I could hear was the heavy breaths of her mirth. And yes, she wasn't exactly laughing with me. It was bloody funny, though. And then I laughed with her, laughing at me, laughing with her, at me, and at the whole bloody ridiculous thing. I watched her happily, and it was utterly hilarious when I considered it. After a few moments of her getting herself together once more by wiping the tears from her eyes and sighing, I told her the obvious. Must have been those bloody hairs of St. Catherine of Siena. Who knew she was so bloody heavy-headed? Vaunt rocked back into silent guffaws. Well, it was rumoured that she thought a lot about herself. She must have been quite big-headed, as the Anglo-Saxons say. Again, I watched the young woman amused with my own amusement, before adding further to it by continuing, Vaunt, dearest girl, could you help me, get some of these things off, please? I might need a little bit of help doing so.